Good to see everybody tonight. We're in chapter 13 of the book of Revelation, and it's a very interesting chapter, and it's one of the places where almost regardless of what commentary you're reading, at least for the first half of the chapter, everyone seems to kind of come back and converge in agreement to some measure as to who this beast is. And at least in some sense, there's an agreement there. So I think that'll be easy enough for us tonight. But there's actually three characters that we're going to be looking at in chapter 13. I think I got a dead battery. There we go. The three characters are the dragon, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the land. Now, Brian talked to us about which of these three on Sunday.
Dragon.
Yes, very good. The dragon. And in what way was the dragon? What was the storyline of the dragon's appearance there? How does he show up in the story? Okay. Yes. Tonight we're going to see that he gives these beasts their power. But back in chapter 12. What was he up to?
Thrown down from he was thrown down from
he's thrown down from heaven, loses his standing. I sort of take that to me, I don't think he's referring to some primordial battle back before the creation of the world. I think that this has to do with some representation of the gospel of Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. Is, in one sense, the casting out of Satan. We see him represented in the Old Testament and in chapter 12 as the accuser of who? It's called in chapter 12 the accuser of the brethren. And he accuses them before God night and day. Can you think of an Old Testament story in which you see him playing that role? Yeah, in the book of Job. He's the one who is accusing Job of being a mercenary who serves God not out of loyalty and devotion to who God is, but simply as a self-serving thing, that Job just serves God because God blesses him. Take the blessing away, what will Job do? He'll curse you to your face. So this is the sort of thing that we can make sense of his name being. He is the accuser. And what else could he make accusation of us about? There's sort of another story or image of this in the book of Zechariah. We won't go into detail there, but could he make an accusation against you? Could Satan accuse you of having done anything wrong? Anybody here want to say, nope, not me. The devil's got nothing on me. I am squeaky clean. And no worries. No, if we were to be in the courtroom of heaven, as it were, and Jesus and Satan were the prosecuting attorney, I'd be in a really bad situation. And that sort of seems to be the position that he occupied until Jesus dies for our sins, is buried, rises again, and ascends to the Father's right hand, presenting his blood before the throne of God as an atonement for what? Our sins. Now, when Satan accuses Matt of that, being angry at his wife the other day, or saying something he shouldn't have to one of his kids, or whatever else, Matthew do you want to share any sins? Whatever that thing was that Matthew did this week that he shouldn't have done. Well, when he makes that accusation against Matthew, what now? Does it stick?
No.
Why? Because Matt is
Saved.
saved.
By the blood of the Lamb.
He's covered in the blood of the Lamb. Satan has no standing in the courtroom of God. He can no longer accuse the saints night and day. And maybe in that sense is one way we can interpret the meaning of him falling from heaven. He's cast out. He can no longer occupy this position as he once was able to do. But at any rate, I've kind of already gotten myself sidetracked. At the very beginning of chapter 12, we just see the dragon wanting to devour the child of this woman who Brian described as sort of a composite figure of Old Testament lineage, or the drama of the seed promise from Genesis 3. There would be one who would come who would crush the head of the serpent, the head of this dragon. And throughout the Old Testament, we see this promise being carried through the saints of old, through Israel, perhaps. And so all of that kind of comes down, yes, to include a figure such as Mary, though this is broader than Mary, that she would be like the final point in that process as she brings forth the male child. And has Satan's effort to prevent the birth of this child been successful? No. Is he able to devour the child as soon as it's born? No. It's caught, he just compresses the whole history of Jesus' life and ministry into a few words, and he's caught up to heaven. The devil's plans to stop the purposes of God through the destruction of Jesus fail. And so he turns his fury toward the woman, and he chases her off into the wilderness, but she's protected from him. And then he turns his attention where? To the rest of her offspring, right? Which I think Brian indicated that your view was that that's probably primarily referring to like the Gentile church, right? And so as the gospel spreads to the Gentiles, he devotes his wrath toward them, and he's trying to persecute these other offspring of the woman. So how is he going to, according to chapter 12 and verse 17, the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring, those who keep the commandments of the Lord and the testimony and hold on to the testimony of Jesus. And the last place we see this dragon as he goes off to make war is he's standing where? Yeah, he's standing on the seashore. So the question becomes is how is this dragon, who by the way has 7 heads, 10 horns, and turns his fury toward the rest of her offspring, how's he going to make war on the rest of her offspring? Well, that's where we come to chapter 13. How will he make war on the rest of her offspring? By summoning a beast from the sea to sort of serve as his proxy. Okay? So if you think of Satan as this spiritual entity, this spiritual being, if he wants to wage war against people who are living and embodied in the world, he needs to have some embodiment. This spiritual entity needs to take possession of or inform some physical entity to do his bidding on his behalf, right? This is the way that this kind of thing works. So he's going to summon a beast out of the sea, standing on the seashore. He will summon this beast out of the sea, which is what is going on when we come to chapter 13. And John sees this beast rising up out of the sea. And we're going to look at that first, this first beast. Let's read this together. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's. Its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who can fight against it?" And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And it is allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. Okay, so let's work on this a bit. The beast from the sea, a few things, we can't look at every detail, but we notice that it has 7 heads and 10 horns. What did we already notice on the screen I had up earlier that reminds us of?
Dragon.
Yeah, the dragon also had 7 heads and 10 horns. I think the idea here, and I want to go ahead and just throw this, I thought I would maybe say this for the big reveal at the end, but in case I don't get there, I think what you have in this entire chapter is this amazing parody, is the way I like to look at it. Another way of putting it, it is a counterfeit, but would be a counterfeit of what? You've got a dragon, you've got a sea beast, and we'll get to the land beast in a moment. How many of those are there? Bad guys are there then? There's 3, okay? What can you think of that would be sort of the mirror opposite of these 3 really bad guys?
The Trinity.
Yeah, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. And who would be the counterpart, as it were, the spiritual counterpart? There's the spiritual source behind the Holy Trinity. God the Father, right? Okay. And what would be the source of this unholy Trinity, the spiritual power?
Satan or the dragon.
Yeah, Satan or the dragon. And then, as the Father has an image, and what is that image? His Son. Hebrews 1 verse 3. He is the express image of his person, the exact representation of the Father. So in this way, we're seeing a representation of the spiritual being Satan, this dragon, this 7-headed, 10-horned dragon, as he's represented and embodied in the beast, okay, who also has the 7 heads and 10 horns. And then I think maybe it's a little bit weaker when you get to the third, being the Holy Spirit, and the land beast, the false prophet, but I think there are parallels there as well. But what we're seeing here is that the sea beast that the dragon conjures up out of the ocean, out of the wild, tempestuous Gentile sea, is sort of an image, a reflection of the dragon. All right? We also notice that this dragon is a composite beast. We've used that word a lot. It's these different kinds of beasts that are all put together. And it's specifically referred to as a leopard, bear, lion beast. Okay? I came up with locorpions for the scorpion locust chord, but I don't know. This is not a liger, but Liberion or something like that. But this also is, we have a really good clue then to help us try to identify who this beast is. Because we see these same animals used to define beasts rising up out of the sea, going back to Daniel chapter 7, which again is just a pivotally important Old Testament chapter to be familiar with as you read through the book of Revelation. You need to be familiar with this chapter. But here's how the chapter starts, and I've condensed it a little bit. But Daniel says that in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a vision. I saw in my vision by night, and look, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the, what?
Great sea.
The sea, okay? And then 4 beasts came up out of this sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion, the second was like a bear, the third was like a leopard. So there's our 3 creatures. Now, we're going to get to a 4th beast in a moment, but knowing what we do, if you're a student of Daniel, he does this several times through the book in different ways, but he's always in these kinds of visions identifying these creatures or these images with what? What are they representative of?
Satan.
Kingdoms, yeah. Kingdoms are these world empires, and the first is always Babylon itself, the one that he's there with. And then the second would be who knocked off the Babylonians? Yeah, the Persians. The Medo-Persian Empire replaced them. And then came Alexander from the west with the Greek Empire. And then finally the Greeks were overwhelmed by the Romans. Okay, would be the fourth. And that's what Daniel saw at the furthest extent of his vision. A fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful, exceedingly strong, had great iron teeth, devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had what? 10 horns. Okay? Just like this beast that we're seeing in Revelation 13 come out of the sea. And so I think by referring to it as, the lion, bear, leopard, beast, he's sort of identifying it as the composite of all of this, and it is undoubtedly this fourth great terrifying beast that John is now seeing Satan bring up out of the sea. Any questions on that? Is that reasonably clear where this is coming from and how we can identify it, therefore, as the Roman Empire, if you will? So we could say that the beast from the sea, for absolutely sure, is a world empire. That's what it represents. And generally speaking, I think when we look at Daniel and other passages, we could say that these are the kingdoms of men whenever they cease to serve God's purpose as his servants. What is Romans 13 and Revelation 13, you can remember that. They're both 13s. Tell us important things about God's people, the saints' relationship to civil authorities. What does Romans 13 tell us that civil governments are instituted to do? Well, first, what are they? What are they called there? It's a clue.
They're created by God.
Okay, yeah, they're established by God for what purpose? Yeah, for our good. There needs, even anarchy is better than no government at all, somebody said. Lauren's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Civil authorities established by God for the arrangement of life and making it a functional society. We need government. This is not something that is in opposition to God's purposes and plans. And he calls in Romans 13 civil government God's minister that exists to execute judgment on God's behalf, to maintain order, to punish the wrongdoer, and to reward those who do good. And yet, over the course of time, governments have a tendency to fail to see themselves as serving God's purpose by providing that sort of temporary, limited government and rule for the benefit of its citizens, for the upholding of that which is good and the suppression of that which is evil. And instead of seeing themselves as ministers or servants of God, they begin to see themselves as servants of self and as God himself, okay? They become, again, this parody of the real thing. And when they do that, they will inevitably become oppressive as they seek to consolidate their power. And we have just any number of old biblical examples of this kind of thing. Think of Egypt. When Joseph and the patriarchs went down into Egypt, what was Egypt? What was the governance of Egypt? Was that a good thing or a bad thing for Joseph and his family? It was good. This was a place of safety for the nation to grow and to develop and to have certain protections in place. But by the time we get to Moses, what is the relationship between the people of God and the Egyptians and Pharaoh? Yeah, it's extraordinarily oppressive. We're killing all of your boy children by throwing them into the river. And no longer is Egypt functioning as a servant of God to reward the righteous and to suppress evil, but it has inverted itself. And when Moses confronts Pharaoh to tell him to let his people go, that he says, Yahweh says, let my people go, what was Pharaoh's famous response? And
no.
Yeah, not just no, but he said,
Who is God?
Who is Yahweh that I should obey his voice? Pharaoh thinks that he, as the head of state, is the embodiment of God, and that Egypt is his body who carries out his function as head of state. And he will take no rival to that. So you have the plagues that explain to Pharaoh who Yahweh is, that he should obey his voice. Then we can go through all of these others: Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Each of them are used by God in a particular way to serve his purpose, and as each of them then begin to pervert that purpose, they are taken away. Okay? And that's what we're seeing happen here with Rome. So, but generally speaking, that's what these beasts coming out of the sea are. They're world empires gone bad. Specifically, this beast, this particular one, is a symbol of the Roman Empire. Now, the beast from the sea, there's several characteristics we could note about it. It's given power and authority from the dragon. It's stated very plainly that he's functioning at the behest of satanic and demonic authority. It has blasphemous names on its head. Any idea what that might be a reference to? Thinking of what would the heads?
The Roman emperors consider themselves deities.
Yes, the Roman emperors consider themselves deities, write their letters using titles that are references to deities, allow temples and whatnot to be built in their honor and worship to be offered up in their name. So these blasphemous names on its heads. It seems, it says, to have a mortal wound. It's almost like it dies and rises again. And I think that maybe there's some particular things with regard to Nero and the year of the three emperors. After he commits suicide, there are, within 1 year, 3 different emperors as attack after attack is made on Rome, and it is embroiled in civil war, even as the siege on Jerusalem is taking place far, far away. And it's almost like the whole empire is tottering on the brink of disaster, but then it, under Vespasian, yes, thank you, gets its act back together, and it's impressive. People see that and think, wow, he's indestructible. And there's also some theories about a myth about Nero, that he didn't really die, he went into exile, and he's going to come back, or others that he died, but he's resurrected again, sort of like Elvis is in the room thing. I'm not sure that that's the idea, it could be, but seems to die and rise again. Not really a death and resurrection, but it seems like it. But again, do you see this idea of the parody? Just as Christ is given authority and power from the Father and receives worship rightfully as the divine Son, but the Roman emperors are receiving worship in blasphemous ways. He rose and died and rose again. Seems to do the same. It makes war on the saints, however, and the whole earth worships and marvels at it. Who else have we seen the whole earth is bowing and worshiping before already in the book? The one on the throne and the Lamb, right? So again, you're just seeing these parallels. Who are exempted? Who is not falling in for the idea of worshiping the emperor and the state as God? Well, he says those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life, verses 8 through 10. Okay? Everyone else goes along with it. But the true saints recognize that this is a parody, a false knockoff, a counterfeit of a real thing, and they don't go for it. And we're also told in verse 18, skipping ahead to the end of the chapter, that this beast is also a what? A man. Okay? Now, how can it be an empire and a man at the same time?
Well, again, as we're seeing, a lot is positing, pushing together similar things. I mean, that's one idea.
Yeah, that's true. I think that the idea that I'm driving at is the notion that the head of state, that the state is often identified with the head of state, right? And particularly in non-democratic type setups, the king, the emperor, can stand for the body as a whole. So I think that it's referring here specifically to one of the emperors as the beast, as the particular top of the hierarchy of this empire is the emperor, and there's one of these emperors in particular who's being identified as this persecuting beast. And it says about him, somebody read verse 18.
This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666.
Okay, so this is what everybody came to Revelation for, right? To this class. So you're probably familiar with this, that in the ancient world, and the Jews in particular, did a lot of stuff in which, I forget what the...
Numerology.
Yeah, it's a numerology, basically, is the idea. And the use, this isn't exactly it, but it's something like we would say, well, the letter A equals 1, and B 2, and so on and so forth. And then you take the letters of someone's name and you add them all together and you get a total. In fact, there's something they found in Pompeii where the volcano blew up, was someone said, they found a note or an inscription that said, I love her whose number is, and that's like 454. And I don't think that was the first 3 letters of her phone number. Her name, when added up, equals 454. So it was like a common way of speaking in code. But the point that many commentators point to is that when in using the Hebrew alphabet and the translation of Nero into Hebrew, you come up with the number 666 from Nero Caesar. And so it's just pretty universally, there's some exceptions, but pretty universally accepted that this is what he's talking about. And it seems like he wants his readers to have this insight, as Ryan's translation put it, to have this wisdom, this insight, to be able to do this and see who it is that I'm talking about. So you have, out of the sea, empire emerged, just like Daniel saw, and this would be the 4th of those beasts, the Roman Empire. That would be something they would immediately grab onto, the original readers, and then identifying specifically Nero Caesar as the head of that state, the beast, so that they would recognize who it is. Now, he fits all of these things also that we just enumerated. We could say that his power and authority is coming to him from a demonic source. He certainly was a blasphemer. I mean, he was a vile human being, and certainly accepted worship and encouraged it in his honor. He's the one who seems to die and rise again. He makes war on the saints. In fact, Nero was the one who instigated the first imperial persecution of the Christians. You remember the story, there was the Great Fire of Rome. What year was that, Brian? 64. And then he, in order perhaps to shift blame away from himself, it's theorized, blamed the Christians for it and began the imperial persecution of the saints. And interestingly, I think I've got this on a slide a little bit later, that started in like mid-November of 64, when he issued a decree against the Christians and continued on until his death by his own hand in June of 68, which comes out to be right at, interestingly, 42 months, 3.5 years, 1,260 days, which is over and over again the length of time that it says that the beast has authority to to do what he does. All right, that's back in verses 5, 6, 7. All right, so this would be my summary statement on the first beast out of the sea. 666 is the beast from the sea is the Roman Empire acting as an agent of Satan at the time of John's revelation. It was led by Nero, who instigated an imperial persecution of Christians from November through 64 through June of 68. So pretty cool stuff, huh? Impressive, yeah. And again, while that's hard for us maybe to think through, again, for people living in this time, I think that this is not at all difficult for them to kind of work their way through, Jewish Christians in particular. Now we've got to also consider the beast from the land, which I find a good bit more difficult to identify with any particular certainty. But we read about him in verses 11 through 17. I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven and to the earth in front of people, and by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. So, what can we say about the beast from the land? The beast from the land. Well, first of all, it has, like we've seen already, sometimes you see one thing, but then you look closer and you see something different. This has the appearance of a lamb, but it speaks with the voice of a dragon. Okay, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Okay, it's appears to maybe to be your friend, but if you listen carefully, he's your worst enemy. Exercises authority on behalf of the first beast. Okay, so he's authorized to act on behalf of the first beast in the presence of the first beast. And by him being on the land, this could either maybe be a reference to Israel. Many people take the reference to the earth or to the land to be a specific reference to Israel. But I would also say that unlike the sea, which represents that which is coming from afar, on the land is that which is right up in your face. Okay, it's close. So, you know, Nero's in Rome, far away, and you're either maybe in Judea or in Asia Minor, in Pergamum, and there's another beast that's his representative doing his bidding right up in your grill. Okay, that's the way John would have put it. So there he performs signs and wonders. He gives breath and deceives. He persuades the people into idolatry, and he's also known as the false prophet. Later, he's going to be referred to by that epithet in 19:20 and again in 20, verse 10. So that sounds to me, again in general terms, that the beast from the land is any local religious entity that provides spiritual support for the idolatrous pretensions of the state or the head of state, in this case, being Nero in this particular case. In other words, there might be someone on the local level who is advocating on behalf of the power back in Rome. And through these various methodologies is soliciting your support of what's going on back in Rome. Now, the commentators that I read break into two groups. Some say, well, this is a clear reference to the emperor cults that were located throughout the Roman Empire, in which the various emperors were worshipped locally by the people living there. And I think that there's really good arguments that can be made for that. Some of them I think are again somewhat far-fetched, but I think there's good points that can be made for them, and we'll consider some of them in just a moment. The other is that it represents apostate Judaism and its currying favor with Rome and in effect causing people to go in with Rome against the Christians as well. For those who believe that it's a reference to the emperor cults that existed within the various cities around the Roman Empire, so on the land, up close, in your grill, encouraging you to bow down to the beast. Going all the way back to Augustus in 29 BC, Pergamum, one of the 7 churches in Asia, the cities in Asia, built a temple in his honor. By the year 14 AD, I'm told that over 30 cities had an emperor cult located within them, and that it was particularly strong in the region of Asia Minor, where the 7 churches to whom this letter is primarily addressed were located. Certainly Nero received such divine honors, and later Domitian did as well. So a very good case could be made that, again, these are religious representatives in the local place that you live that are calling upon you to offer your worship to the emperor. The other view is that it represents apostate Judaism, and a good case can be made for this as well because it was completely subservient to Rome. We may not think of it in that way, but in John 11, after Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, what does the high priest, the ultimate representative of Judaism in that day, tell all his lackeys?
It's good for one man to die for the nation.
If we let Jesus keep on doing what he's doing, everyone's going to believe in him. And the Romans are going to come and take away our place as leaders and our whole nation. So it is better if we allow this one man to die for all the nation than for the whole nation to die. In other words, we need to capitulate to Rome in order to save, against Christ, in order to save the nation.
Well, and that also in that vein, you know, in the dialogue between the leaders, the mob, and Pilate, you know, when he's like, well, we've got no king but Caesar. Like
Yeah, John 19, or I think that's Matthew 22, 15 through 17. Exactly. Their response to Pilate, who's inclined to let Jesus go, the Gentile representative, but it is the Jewish elite, the priesthood, that says, we have no king but Caesar. The Jewish priests are manipulating the Roman governor to crucify the Messiah, on the claim that if he doesn't do this, he's somehow not loyal to the emperor. You see that? So you can see how this fits very much the idea of apostate Judaism. And again, the idea that he's identified as the false prophet, which seems to be something that applies primarily to covenant breakers, not just to false pagan religions. I don't know that there's ever a reference to them as false prophets. The false prophet is the one who allegedly represents Yahweh, God, but is leading you astray. So that would be an argument on that behalf. All right. So much that we could say about this, and we've got 2 minutes to say it. the application for us. Is it possible for any civil government to become an agent of Satan who makes war on the saints? Did that end with the Roman Empire?
No, it's alive and well.
Yeah, it's like all over the world. I mean, you see it all over the world. You think of it, and Heidi's behind the camera, but she, has been up. She's been in jail, okay, under the questioning of the authorities for her faith and assistance in propagating the gospel in China. China does not believe that there is anything above the state. It is the supreme authority. It answers to no one. Everyone answers to it. It does not answer to anyone else. It is God, and you obey the ruler. Now, guess who is the biggest supporter of Chinese Communist Party? The state church. Would you agree with that? That they do the bidding of, maybe not in every case, but they are more than willing to comply with the demands of the state, including compromising their teaching and informing on those that they come in contact with who are unregistered with the state and unwilling to submit to the way the state says you can practice your faith, right? So, in fact, my few trips that I've made teaching in China, the only trouble I ever had was being called out by state church leaders who did not approve of me being there teaching the gospel, and threatened. They didn't actually do it, but threatened to turn me into the state. So, and it's very easy for any church or religious group to simply give in to the demands of the state and become its advocate and supporter, even in the oppression of people. I mean, the Catholic and Lutheran churches in Germany just capitulated left and right to the demands of Hitler, and that's where the, quote, confessing church that people like Bonhoeffer tried to lead an underground effort to provide people with real spiritual support during all that. But anyway, some very interesting stuff, and obviously things that are relevant for Christians to think about today. All right.